Philip, as you know, I think me and you are both very aware, but Ted Cruz, he just left everyone stranded back in Texas, went to Cancun. Philip, you got to go to Cancun a few weeks ago. How was your experience? Is it comparable to Ted Cruz's?
Yeah, I really can't believe he would do such a thing. In a time of crisis, one of the strongest winter storms Texas has seen, and he just left,
Yeah,
abandoned
I
his people.
I mean, it's kind of ironic. I mean, he is the senator from that state. He's supposed to be the one who's actually supposed to be helping them. But here you see other people from New York raising millions of dollars, and you see his own political candidates such as Beto O'Rourke actually raising more money than even Ted Cruz did. And Ted Cruz is he's a senator from there, so it's hilarious to see that he would just do such a thing. And remember, global warming doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
But yeah, hey everyone, welcome back to the Blue South. Today we've got a little bit of a different episode. We're going to be, I guess, kind of revamping a previous episode that we did on Belarus and Navalny. We've seen lots of different updates happen throughout the past few weeks, and we thought that we'd do another episode kind of to go over everything and what's new, what's changed. I'm joined by Philip Vishnevsky, one of my dear friends who has personal experience firsthand of what's going on there. Philip, how are you doing?
Hey everyone, I'm doing good, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing really good. Thank you so much for asking. So let's start off. To give some context, a few weeks ago, we got to do a very similar episode on this topic. But we had so many things happen and so much updates going on throughout this topic that we've got to go over everything again because it's so important that we do. So let's rewind a few weeks. So what have we seen that's new, Philip?
Absolutely. So there's definitely been a decrease in sort of violence and protests against the president. But that being said, it's still not safe to go outside and sort of live life before the presidential election.
Okay, and then for the presidential election, was it necessarily like a peaceful transition of power? What have we seen there? Has it been calm?
Absolutely not. We've actually not seen any transition in power. The president, Alexander Lukashenko, still remains to be the president, or I should say dictator, actually, for an indefinite period of time. During the election back in August, we've seen very severe voter fraud and voter intimidation. Definitely at all of the polling places, people were uh, intimidated into voting for Lukashenko and not, his opposition.
And I know that we've had, I think in the past few weeks, when we last did this topic, we discussed that like the protesters were getting abducted into weird, mysterious cars. They were getting thrown in there. People were being killed, raped, jailed. Is that all still happening?
It definitely is. So back then, it was very severe. Thousands of people were just being thrown into cars, arrested, thrown into jails for basically just protesting peacefully. And I mean, they've been tear gassed, they've been shot with rubber bullets. At least a couple people have been killed, and it's just very bad what's going on there.
Okay, and have we made any progress? I think that's the best question to probably ask. Has there been any progress by the protestees, if I should call them that, the protesters? Have there been any progress that they've gotten to make, or is it a stalemate?
They've definitely scared Lukashenko. He actually had to seek help from Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, who actually helped sort of fund um, the military, sort of mobile military units that were transported to Belarus to sort of help with these protests. But of course, those were the same people who were throwing people into vans and carting them off to jails.
Yeah, I'm looking at the situation and I see that I feel like although he is asking help from Putin, he does definitely see this as a problem to his dictatorship, and he obviously needs some sort of help in order to solidify that. But the people who are at Belarus are finally brave enough to go out there onto the streets and finally demand for what's right. I think that is super important. And that's one of the most fundamental points of democracy that they can be headed to if they do continue to push on this severely and make this a very big priority. Because I think if they do, if they really make it a priority and they just continue this, eventually it's just going to give in. I mean, they can't rely on Russia forever, and Putin has problems of his own. So I guess next, do you want to go into? Sorry about that. Do you want to go more deeply into the voter fraud, censorship, the riots?
Absolutely. So, especially back in August, during the time of the election, we've seen lots of censorship of the media. There has been, especially um, Belarusian telecom companies disabling the internet on certain election days so people could not communicate. And we've seen definitely lots of propaganda on the media and all of the news sources in Belarus during that
Okay.
time.
And that is very prominent. I know definitely for sure in Russia. I wouldn't think though as much in Belarus, but obviously not. So are we seeing? Is it? Are they sort of copying Russia? Is that what we're seeing, or what would you say about that in comparison? If you'd make a comparison.
Yeah, Putin definitely sent a couple propaganda sort of people to Belarus to
Reporters, yep.
help spread these fake news about the president, how great he is and all that stuff. And yeah, it's just, I never thought we would see something like this people call Belarus one of the last dictatorships in Eastern Europe.
I remember I read like I think 2 weeks ago that the opposition was actually paying for protesters to be bussed up to the Capitol to kind of counter these protests that were happening. And they were bussing government officials up there in order to go against the people that were already there. And so that's already a scary thought, the fact that the government is even forcing its own employees to kind of sort of go with them, otherwise threatening them with um, all sorts of things, and that's already a scary thought already to see. But what about yourself? So I know that I mentioned that you do have some personal experiences with that. Talk to me about that. What do you feel like you've had personal experience with Belarus that really helped shape this topic for you?
So I've been to Belarus in the past, especially before coronavirus times. I went there every year because I have family who lives in the capital Minsk, and they've told me scary stories of where my uncle actually almost got arrested for just driving down the street. Um, it's something you would see in North Korea. I mean, they would pull you over, they would check all your documents, they would check your phone, they would check everything you have to make sure you're not spreading any information that they don't want you to spread. Um, People are getting arrested on the streets for walking the wrong way. I mean, my grandparents have to look out for their life every time they want to go to the store to buy food.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, like you said, that is so it feels so foreign because I mean, here we are sitting in our homes, everything is totally fine, at least for the time being. And you can't even get out of your own home. And these are people that you personally know. So I mean, I totally sympathize with you. I think that that definitely shows how scared the government is. I mean, they figured that I think they're at like the last few possible places they could be, and they don't really have a whole lot of wiggle room for themselves to go to because if they give in anymore, then the protesters can definitely take over, and they could be a huge threat to Lukashenko himself. And what about the armed forces? I know we briefly touched on that, but the hired armed forces from Russia and the current state of what's going on. Well, what about that?
So they're definitely keeping some of these sort of mobile armed forces that were sort of bussed in from Russia. they're still keeping them out to, protect against this, but there's a lot less violence now. I think people have kind of given up a little bit. They're not as passionate about this anymore. There's still some opposition, but it's definitely not as severe as it was last year.
So it looks like it is more dying down, and unfortunately, it will probably continue at least until the next election cycle.
Yeah,
Okay, well, yeah, that is definitely a shame. I, I mean, I'm sure they are very passionate about it, but the fact that they're going at them so strongly, the opposition that is, that's really really bad. But I'm sure though they're going to get lots of support from the more Western countries, and I know various other countries that are definitely opposed to Belarus, the government at least, and Russia. They're definitely might be helping the protesters in the future, of course, for the next election cycle. And I hope that does definitely happen. But next, the next topic we'd like to touch on is Navalny. And that was the second half of what we covered last time. Last time, when we got to cover Navalny, I remember what happened was he was poisoned on a plane, and he was poisoned. He was transported out of there. And the last we talked about it, he was in a hospital and he was slowly dying. He was unconscious. However, in the past few weeks, we've learned that he is alive. He did wake up from his coma and he is very weak. But very shortly, a few weeks ago, he was actually once again taken to prison. And that is no surprise, of course, to Putin. He's Putin's biggest, uh, should I say, opponent. And he's the only one I think that can really do some serious damage to him, which is why he's had so many opposition attempts or so many assassination attempts. It's a better word. And he's had lots of hatred go towards him because he's the only thing standing between Putin's dictatorship and freedom. So, Philip, what about that?
yeah. So to recap, sort of, he was on a plane. He was poisoned. His underwear was poisoned with a Cold War Soviet neurotoxin. Um, he was urgently transported to a Russian hospital where his medical documents were actually faked to make it seem like he was perfectly fine, not poisoned with anything, just had, mild, maybe food poisoning symptoms or something like that. Um, then his condition got worse, and Germany actually took him into one of their um, sort of premium hospitals where he was in a coma for a few months battling this neurotoxin. And after that, he blamed his poisoning on the Kremlin. The Kremlin denied it. He continued his sort of political opposition. He came back to Moscow, where he was actually immediately arrested for violating probation for some fake, you know, allegations against him back in 2014, and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison.
And it's really good actually that he got to go to Berlin because if he wouldn't have gone to Berlin, I don't even think that they would have actually 100% known that he was poisoned by the Russians. And because the Russians were trying to cover that up this entire time, if he probably hadn't gone to Berlin, I don't think he would have lived for much longer. And I do want to mention, I believe it was Novichok poisoning, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened to um, the spy in Berlin a few years ago and his daughter. Do you remember about that?
Mm,
Yeah, that's what
no.
happened. There was the exact
Yeah.
same Novichok poisoning situation back there. But I mean, it really is a shame how they just are continuously wanting to go after him. It's hard to see because it's completely across the world, but the fact that free speech is so limited there, and just even having your own news show where you talk about what you believe in is completely suppressed, and to the point where they're ready to kill you if you do say the wrong things, which obviously they do not like what Navalny has said. Um, and yeah, I think I read in an article we had just recently, two more reporters were arrested in Belarus for the fact that they recorded one of the protests, put it online. Both of them are currently in jail. And then Navalny, he just had more charges put against him. And not only that, I think he's even facing possible jail time that's extended on top of what he currently has. So they're just trying to find whatever they possibly can that they can against him. It's just really sad to see.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, that's about all the time we've got for today. Philip, it was really nice to have you on. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so be sure to join us next time. And if you want more Blue South content, podcast updates, Q&A live streams, and other stuff, be sure to check out our Instagram at the Blue South. I'm Daniel, your host, and this has been the Blue South. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening.